This is Rob Tebbutt for Boxing Social in association with Betfred. Delighted, as always, to be joined by Eddie Hearn of Matchroom Boxing. How are you, Eddie?
Very well, mate. Very well. Yourself, Robert?
Not bad, not bad. Just about recovering from two very, very late nights this past weekend.
Yes, that is right, actually, because unfortunately, being not able to go to America because of the quarantine back and forth, although that is about to change, good news, I stay up and watch the fights. And I didn't realise what a killer it is staying up to watch these fights because I think I got to bed after the Jacobs-Rosado fight at about 6 o'clock in the morning and then sort of got up for 8 o'clock with the kids. And then obviously the next night you had Dubois against Joyce. And I actually didn't stay up for the Tyson fight, but I did wake up and watch a few clips. So another packed weekend of boxing, and we got another one this weekend, and then we got another one the weekend after. So it's good times for, you know, especially with the current environment. So I think everyone's doing really well.
Yeah, I mean, we've kind of been starved of shows all throughout the year, and now they're coming thick and fast. I'm impressed that you managed to stay awake through Jacobs-Rosado, Eddie.
Oh, very disappointing, wasn't it? Yeah, I mean, I think I was really happy with the build-up. I was excited for the fight, you know, and it was just a weird fight. It was like both guys after 3 or 4 rounds sort of realised they could probably coast through this fight and win. And no one did what they promised they'd do, you know. I don't really know how. I tweeted after, which some people said, you know, was a bit disrespectful, but I'd rather just be honest with you. I thought it was a poor fight. And I said, I don't think anyone really deserved to win because I don't think anyone really tried to win. You know, I mean, there was arguments. Jacobs probably had the more telling punches. Rosado boxed, you know, well at times. And I saw Gabe's comment to me, you know, I outboxed him, I did this. I'm like, but when it was close in the championship rounds, you didn't really, you know, you can't say you went out there to win the rounds. Did you outbox him? Maybe at times, and Danny Jacobs the same, you know. I think Danny said after, you know, it's just a weird environment. I just felt like it was a bit of a sparring match, but you just, you know, when you've talked that talk, you're going to do this and you're going to do that. You're going to make him respect you. You're going to do this. It's New York against Philly, blah, 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 blah. We want some fireworks. And sitting at home watching these fights has given me the opportunity to be a bit of a fan, right? Just a normal punter. So sometimes I guess you'll see me react in a different kind of way than I would maybe if I was there, which might have been a bit more corporate. And you know, I just tweeted straight after the fight saying the most entertaining bit of the fight was when the MC mucked it up at the end, and I don't think anyone deserved to win. It's not a criticism. I just, as a fan, if you like, I expected more after the build-up and the talk. So, you know, we'll see what happens. I mean, look, there's still big fights out there for both guys, actually, but I felt like that was an opportunity to put on a really good fight, and there was a nice little bit of rivalry bubbling that didn't really explode in the way you'd hope.
It certainly didn't. Daniel Jacobs, what's his contractual situation now with Matchroom Boxing? Is he still under contract, or was that the last fight of his deal? What's the story with Daniel Jacobs?
Fight extension after Canelo Alvarez. You know, and just because it wasn't the greatest performance in the world, we still want to work with Danny Jacobs. I mean, he's still a big name. He's a tremendous fighter. I think he's got opportunities to fight for a world title at 168 pounds. And we've had a good run with Danny Jacobs. I mean, he was the first one that put his faith in us when we signed him, when we did a deal with HBO. We got him 2 fights. Then he fought for the world middleweight title, the IBF title against Derevenchenko. He won that fight. Then we got him the fight with Canelo. You know, then he's boxed Chavez and Rosado. So we've done a tremendous job, and we're very close with Danny and Keith Connolly, his manager as well. So definitely looking to continue working together. You know, I think the obvious fights are Billy Joe Saunders, Caleb Plant, Callum Smith if he beats Canelo Alvarez. So yeah, there's plenty of options for him, and we'll sit down later this year or in the new year and see what he wants to do.
We'll just run through the rest of the card quickly before we move on. A spectacular performance from Daniel Yulusinov. I have to say, I did expect him to look very good against Julius Ndongo, but he went out and got the job done in style.
Yeah, I think that Ndongo's a strange one, isn't he? Where he came over, he had that spell where he looked really dangerous and really good. I mean, he knocked out Troyansky in his backyard to win the world title. Then he come to Glasgow and beat Ricky Burns in his backyard. And then he boxed for the undisputed title against Terence Crawford. He got knocked out. I mean, it's no shame. So from there, he's definitely not the fighter he was when he beat Troyansky and he beat Burns, but he's still a massive step up for Yulusinov. And Daniil Yulusinov is really coming on the blind side, to be honest with you. I'm really, really excited for him. You know, when I signed him, a lot of people that I trust in boxing told me this kid is something really, really special. I remember speaking to Rob McCracken about him, who's obviously been part of all these amateur tournaments and the Olympics where Yulusinov won gold. And Rob McCracken said to me, Ed, this kid is exceptional. And then I signed him. And after about 3 fights, I'm like, Rob, are you sure? You know, speaking to people who told me, are you sure? I'm telling you, I don't know what's happening, but this kid is special. And he was stuck between styles. You know, on one hand, he would have John David Jackson in the corner telling him to sit down in shots and stay in the pocket. And then he'd have his dad on the other side saying, no, you know, he's the Kazakh boxing coach, and saying, no, box, you know, move. And he's just adapted his style, and it's taken him a little bit of time to get it right. He's really got it right now. He's punching very, very hard. And you saw that against Ndongo, who, you know, basically decided he didn't want to continue after 2 heavy knockdowns. And the thing is with Daniil, I'm honestly ready to put him in any fight in the division, because the build-up, you know, has been up and down. You know, he's been a little bit indifferent in his performances. He has a huge following in Kazakhstan. He's a superstar over there. But I feel like a lot of those international fighters need to be moved at pace to stand out. Israil Madrimov, another one, you know.
Ahmed Aliyev.
Yeah, Ahmed Aliyev as well. Murjan, you know, Giasov, all these guys. And he's willing to do it. That's why I said after the fight, like, I really feel that Virgil Ortiz is an amazing fighter. But no one really wants to fight Virgil Ortiz either. So no one really wants to fight Daniil now. So, you know, that's the kind of fight that I'd be willing to put Daniil in, because they're up for anything. And now you're going to see him take significant jumps. And I really believe he can be a world champion. I've always said, from when he was fighting these kind of journeyman types early on in the career, he's going to look really good against the elite fighters. And yeah, it's all coming together, and I'm really excited.
You mentioned Virgil Ortiz. I spoke to Virgil Ortiz a couple of weeks ago. He's very much of the opinion that he wants to fight anyone, anytime, anywhere. But we look at that fight, Yulusinov versus Virgil Ortiz, and it's the type of fight that we would use marinating, or it could go a few fights. You have to have that for a world title. Would you realistically expect to see that for not a world title?
Virgil Ortiz obviously is a lot better known and has a lot more eyeballs on him in the US than Daniil. So. And I don't think Virgil Ortiz for 1 minute would say, oh, I'm not fighting Daniil Yulusinov. But if I had Virgil Ortiz, I probably wouldn't put him in with Daniil Yulusinov, because it's high risk, low reward. Madrimov, Giasov, you know, all these people, you have to take risks, but they're willing to do it. We've just got to find people that are also willing to take risks or believe in themselves enough to fight anybody, you know? So... But we're not interested in marinating Daniil Yulusinov. We're interested in making people realise how good he is, and we have the belief to move him at pace.
Elsewhere on the card, Mohamed Azrazoul Majidov. That's always a difficult name to get out. I'm glad I did that first time. He returns to the ring. When can we expect to see him step up? He's another one who's ready to go. He's at a different kind of stage of his career. He's kind of like, I mean, fight's very different. Sort of like Joe Joyce. He's in his mid-30s, had a very extensive amateur background. He really wants to step up now, and obviously the opponent that he saw this past weekend, he was several levels above. Yeah,
I mean, I think the guy was, 8-0, 9-0, but never really fought anyone of note. He went in there, he beat him up. The guy was a little bit dangerous early on. And you're right, actually, a good comparison, because I think you got 2 great amateurs there with Joe Joyce and Majidov. And I think ability-wise, I think they're like for like, to be honest with you. Again, another fighter where the team, same team actually, Zia and Elvis Crespo, who were basically saying, just anyone. The problem again, Rob, is getting those anyones to fight Majidov, because at 3-0, it's like, why would I want to fight Majidov? So you've either got to pay him a fortune or find someone that wants to work, you know, that isn't afraid to take risks. There's still... By the way, I'm not suggesting Majidov should yet fight a top 15 guy, but I think he should go in now and fight those, standard, I don't know, no disrespect to these guys, but, Lucas Brown or, Eric Molina or maybe even a Dominic Brazil or, I think I'd put him in with all those guys, but it's very difficult. You see it time and time again across all kinds of levels where people don't want to lose to a guy that's 2-0 or 3-0. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't mind losing to a guy who's like a former world champion. But if I lose to this guy, where do I go from there? So we just got to get the opponent right. But again, an exciting heavyweight who's just willing to be thrown in. And I think when you've got that, it's always exciting.
Final one before we move on, Eddie. Nikita Ababiy, somebody I know that you've been a big fan of. You've given him, I think has he not boxed on every, sorry. I think he's the most active DAZN fighter. He's boxed on more DAZN cards since.
Yeah, he's had 10 fights now, and every fight has been streamed live on DAZN. So he's had a great run. He has to start showing more now. He's very exciting. He's a little bit crazy, and I think sometimes he doesn't get his preparation right. I do think I'd like to see him at 154 pounds. It is difficult at the moment. He said in the interview, I don't think he wanted to make excuses, but he basically said, it's just difficult at the moment. A lot of the gyms in New York are shut. It's difficult to get sparring. They're working more on their strength and conditioning because the boxing activity isn't really happening as much. But he has to, I think all those guys, it's so exciting because they're getting to the stage now where we can finally go, right, you ready? And they're going to, and some of the, the managers are going to go, oh, no, we're not. I say, well, tough. You look at Austin Williams against Nikita Ababiy. These are fights where in 6 months' time, we're going to be putting pressure on the guys to take. Any prospects that are around the same kind of weight class that have had their education, that have had their money, that have had their development, it's time. And cross making fights. So Austin Williams will fight Anthony Fowler. If Nikita stays at middleweight, Nikita will fight Felix Cash. Great fight. So many other fights as well. Welterweight, you got Reshat Mati. Looks fantastic. He could fight, I don't know, I don't have a flight for him, Marku.
I was going to say, that'd be great.
for the day. But he could fight Chris Congo, or he could fight Conor Benn, or he could fight Josh Kelly. We need to start, as we expand and sign more people in different territories around the world, we need to start making in-house fights because that's the dream, the bigger dream. That's we match everybody together that we've got, and we've got enough of a network to give the fans the great fights without the politics. So we need to start doing that, but we have to be fair to them and allow them to get that education. And they're very close now. Diego Pacheco will step up in a big fight on the Canelo Alvarez card. Spino, Mati, Biaslanov. Ophir Jones had a draw, so he needs to come back with a good win. Raymond Ford, I think, is an exceptional young fighter. But I'm excited because we haven't got long with these guys till we really find out how big their futures will be.
So Reshat Mati versus Florian Marco in Albania would be some trip.
Well, I've actually mentioned that to them, both of them, and they sort of said we don't, kind of like within our either hearts or culture, we don't really fight our own. Do you know what I mean? So it's not really, and I'm thinking, well, you would do for plenty of money, wouldn't you? So listen, I think that fight in a year's time could shut the country down. So we'll see. But we've got plans for both of those separately at the moment.
Right, moving slightly closer to home this past weekend, Daniel Dubois-Joyce. I know you've done a couple of interviews on it, but I do have to ask you and observe the pleasantries, ask you the mundane questions. Thoughts, Edward, on the fight?
I felt like, it's difficult because I gave an interview yesterday and Frank Warren then phoned up by IFL and said, oh, go on, I need to do that interview, and it's like, you can't, I'm just going to give you my opinion. Right, so you can't come out when Dillian Whyte gets knocked out and give it the old no mandatory anymore, it's all over, or whatever he was going on about, and then let me say my bit, and then you just completely look. I mean, I know it's difficult for him right now, and I could say I don't want to go in too hard on it, because I can tell it's a tough time for him, an emotional time. I mean, he looked like he was gonna. The blood pressure was going to new levels yesterday. So for me, there were a few things that I saw on the night, and again, I enjoyed watching it as a fan. I really did, and it was interesting. I had so many different thoughts. Well, firstly, I thought it was taking place in an old people's home. I don't know. I mean, I know Church House is very nice, but I thought it looked awful in there. I thought Joe-Joyce was going to be walking second. I don't know what happened there. It's all a bit weird. But then when Daniel Dubois got in the ring, I don't know. Mate, again, I'm just giving you an opinion as a fan, right? So it's got nothing to do with politics. I just felt he looked like he'd froze, right? And in the first round, I thought he looked awful. And I thought he looked like he'd frozen. I thought he was rigid, he was slow. He had no confidence. He normally comes out firing and looking sharp. And then Joe was Joe, and again, Frank said yesterday, Eddie said Joe-Joyce is awful. I said, no, a lot of the time he looks awful, but he's actually really effective and he's a good fighter. But I did expect Dubois to come out and it just made you realise that when you're developing a fighter, if you make that catastrophic jump through the levels very quickly, if you're not good enough or if you're not ready, you will become exposed. So I know there's a lot of talk about the eye and stuff like that, but there's deeper stuff than that. I mean, he couldn't handle anything that Joe. I don't think he liked the size. To go back to the corner and to have your cornerman after just 4 rounds going, Daniel, you've got to dig in. This is the fight game. He's like, whoa, what? Do you know something we don't know? About this young man? Because why the drama? Are you telling him to dig in after 4 rounds? So, and also I felt like they needed someone to be working on the eye alone whilst he was trying to talk to Daniel. But this is just fan opinion. But that's when you look at the level that Dubois has been boxing at and the level that Joyce has been boxing at, and consistently. So Dubois is just a young puppy, really. He's a young man with, he has ability, but he's never boxed outside of English title level. He hasn't really boxed at British title level, in my opinion. And where Joe has had to move quicker, like you talk about Madrimov and those people, he's had the blessing of taking the fights that have prepared him for those kind of moments. So Bryant Jennings is a brilliant example. Like that Bryant Jennings fight was more valuable for Joe-Joyce than Daniel's entire career, right? So when it came down to it, he was ready and Dubois wasn't. And, of course, again, it's like the whole quit stuff. Did he quit? Yeah, he took a knee and he let the ref count him out. But I don't think us should ever criticise a fighter for that, because fighters criticise fighters for that. And obviously he took a lot of criticism, but even away from the eye injury, I felt like he was losing the fight by a couple of rounds. He just looked lost and he weren't ready. They threw him in and they thought he was ready and he wasn't. No shame. He'd come back. I mean, I still think that there's a lot of things that a lot of people would have seen that made them think that Daniel Dubois will not cut it at a top grade. But he's a young heavyweight. He's got talent. If he has fractured his eye socket, then I guess he'll be operated on. He'll be out for a year, or that's how bad those injuries are. And he'll come back in probably a couple of 8-rounders. He needs a couple of years now with the injury and the rebuild, and he can come again for sure. He's a very heavy-handed heavyweight, but he just looked lost from the start. And I actually said to someone I was messaging after that 4th round, I said, they don't fancy this. And it come true. But, you hear a lot of stuff in the gyms and, he said this, no, he's done that before and I'm not sure. And he did this to him in sparring and who knows what's true. But ultimately, the praise should go on to Joe-Joyce. The reason that more people are talking about Dubois is because of the investment that Frank and BT made in him. It was like, this is the second coming of a new British heavyweight star. And it wasn't. So that's why people are talking about Dubois. What we should be doing is talking about Joe-Joyce. You know, and talking about what a great performance it was. I didn't think he'd win. I thought he had a chance if it went past 4 or 5. But I thought he boxed really well. And massive credit to Steve Broughton, you know, for stepping in. But, you know, Salas tested positive. He stepped up to the plate. He done a great job. And well done, Sam Jones and Adam Morley. Because as nutty as Sam is, he was right. You know, he told me all along, I'm telling you, from when the fight was made, I'm telling you, Joe wins this fight. Like, we're not even in any doubt at all. And what he said in that head-to-head about the middle fight, and Daniel said, "You're my middle fight." No, he wasn't, because you don't go. What Joe Joyce is? Joe Joyce is a top 15 heavyweight in the world, right? He might be better, but at the moment, I think you can safely say he's top 15. Daniel just boxed at English level, so they made the mistake of thinking he was good enough, thinking he was ready, and he wasn't good enough, and he wasn't ready. No shame. You dust yourself down and you go again. But it was a massive blow for them. Massive blow. Catastrophic blow.
We'll come on and talk about Joe Joyce in a minute, but let's go back and talk about the end of the fight. Obviously, did an interview yesterday, which Frank has then responded to, about your comments questioning the legitimacy of the injury. Just explain those comments, Eddie.
I don't know. All I said was, you know, that I didn't know if it was fractured. I mean, you know, they assessed it and called it a fracture and nerve damage quite quickly. Normally that is done by an X-ray. I've unfortunately been around a lot of fighters that have been X-rayed and have had fractured or broken eye sockets. And, you know, again, I didn't say that you should tweet it out. But, of course, when Kell Brook got criticised of quitting against Gennady Golovkin, and I was in the hospital, and we got the X-ray, which basically showed a hole in his eye socket. Yes, I did post it on social media because I think it's important. So I don't know if he's fractured. You know, is he having an operation? Normally you would if you got a fractured or damaged eye socket. But I wish him all the best. And it's tough. It doesn't matter whether his eye was hurting, it was a thumb in the eye. Normally it doesn't swell the way that swelled in a fractured eye socket injury. But again, I'm not a doctor. I'm just talking to you as a fan. But if it's a fractured eye socket, it'll be out for a year. You know, I mean, you'd have to probably have a plate in there. It's what Kell Brook had. You know, it's what other fighters have had the same injury. So it's not that I don't necessarily think they're lying about the injury. I don't see really the value in that. I just don't think that was the main problem. He was completely outboxed from the first bell, and he didn't look up for it. He didn't look like, and you know, when you talk about quitting, again, I hate saying that fight because we're just pansies, aren't we? I'd fucking quit. I'd take a knee. I wouldn't get up after 10. But these guys aren't supposed to do that in their words, in their world. So to take a knee and to look the ref in the eye and let him count you out for 10, in their world, that's quit. For me, that's sensible. But fighters aren't always supposed to be sensible, you know, to have the mindset to go on and become great. But listen, if he has fractured his eye socket and it stopped him from taking further damage, you can't knock it. You can't knock it. But obviously, the word is in the industry that he quit. But I don't blame him. Fuck that.
How would you compare the end of the Dubois-Joyce fight to the end of AJ Ruiz 1?
Well, AJ Ruiz got up about 6 times, or whatever it was, 5 times. When he went down, it would have been very easy for AJ to quit in the ring. He got up, 5 times when he was severely concussed. On the final note, yeah, he was trying to get some extra time. It wasn't saying to the ref, I can't get up. He didn't sit on one knee, and the ref, go back to that fight and watch how many times the ref was looking in AJ's eyes going, 5, 6. And every time he kept on getting up. He was all over the place. He was concussed, but he kept on getting up. This guy looked in the eyes and let him go 8, 9, 10, and he didn't move from his knee. So this isn't a competition about who's tougher. But AJ didn't quit in that fight. What AJ did was he spat his gum shield out and he tried to get a little bit more time. He went back to the corner and they said, come forward. And he was like, yeah. And he came forward and the ref made 100% the right decision. But when you keep on getting up, when you got concussion, it's a very different story. So they're both very different. But yeah, again, I don't think you can blame. I mean, people talk about it in the Kell Brook fight, you know, against Errol Spence, same kind of thing. That was more similar to Dubois, but not quite as similar because it was, you know, he did get up and, you know, but ultimately it was quite similar in a way that took a shot, went down, and you know, couldn't carry on.
The reason why I asked that is I spoke to Dave Coldwell the day after the fight. He made an interesting point around AJ Ruiz, around Brooks Spence, around now Dubois versus Joyce, and he called for consistency. He seemed to believe that, you know, there was an unnecessary pile-on of Daniel Dubois where there wasn't necessarily from some sectors of the media for Anthony Joshua, and he basically put it down to kind of promotional loyalties, etc. What are your comments on that?
Because if you have to actually, you can't just have it across the board. You have to analyse every fight. Daniel Dubois didn't get hit by really a shot the whole fight other than the jab, right? He wasn't hurt. He wasn't concussed. You know, he wasn't borderline unconscious, right? AJ got hit by a shot that concussed him, that took his legs away, took his stability away, took everything out of him. And he came back and he even won a round. He tried and then he got hit again and they can, you know, so you can't just marry the two up. But again, it doesn't really matter. Everyone's going to have their opinion. If you keep on getting up, then you ain't quit. If you let the ref count you out, it's another story, especially off a jab. But then he was injured. So it's not, you know, I don't think you can blame anyone. But when you keep on getting up, when you can hardly stand up, that's a good sign.
Do you think that we need to look at this as a sport, the whole Q word, the quit word? I mean,
really, because it's just fans, it's just opinion.
I spoke to Anthony Ogogo yesterday, and obviously he had to retire from the sport after a very serious eye injury. He said, he made the very good point that if Daniel Dubois couldn't see, he takes a right hand to the top of the head or where AJ got hit behind the ear, you know, we could have been looking at something potentially serious. Are we as a sport, you know, sometimes too macho? Do we sometimes expect too much from our fighters?
To let the fighters comment, and this is why I will not sit there and say, oh yeah, Daniel Dubois shouldn't have done that, he quit. Because ultimately, these guys are super tough and they're putting their health on their line. I'm just saying that in the world, speak to any fighter, right? And they'll tell you, I see it because I speak to them. And people, you know, I was messaging some of them and they couldn't believe what he did, right? To me, I have no problem with it at all. And you're right, we might be a little bit more sensible where it's like, of course, this is dangerous. He could have affected his health. So no problem. I don't have a problem with it. But know that for the rest of your career, you'll know, fighters will know who fought you, and teams will know that you have that in you. And if you have that in you, you can do it again.
Sorry, moving on. I thought you were doing your typical Frozen face, but moving on, big jugger Joe Joyce. Now we saw the FaceTime call that you had with Sam Jones. I don't think you were wearing a t-shirt, so thanks for that, Eddie.
Yeah, it's a bit awkward, aren't you?
Yeah, a little bit. What did you have to say to Sam Jones?
Nothing. I've just I like Sam. I think anyone that brings a little bit of freshness into the sport. I mean, he reminds me a little bit of me when I started out with Audley. You know, just full of bluster and hot air. I knew about boxing. I grew up around boxing. He knows boxing. But people like look at him and think, this geezer's a complete tosser. But actually, he's all right. He's good for the fighters and he's a good personality. So like and I don't know this, but I'm presuming he was banned from the final press conference because he wasn't allowed up there. But that's silly because Sam's great for the fight. Sam's great for the promotion. I mean, I saw a clip of the sit down. He was brilliant. And by the way, when you talk about, he may have been one of the reasons that Daniel Dubois had gone before the time he got in the ring. Maybe the reason that he had froze a little bit, I don't know, put the doubt in him. So these people are important in the camps. And I've just obviously, you know, we've done the deal with Johnny Fisher, with Lerone Richards, with Florian Marcoux. So we talk a lot. And he's just told me from the get-go, Joe Joyce wins this fight comfortably. Not a problem. And I said to him, I'm not sure. But, you know, and I think, again, as a fan, when you know that everything's heaped on Joe Joyce, you know, ultimately Frank's got both of those guys at the moment, and everything's on Daniel. You know, he wants Daniel to win. Daniel walks second. Daniel gets the home corner. Daniel gets it. And because of the amount of money they've invested in Daniel Dubois, I understand it. So you kind of feel like on the other side, go on, son. You know, and I guess that's the same as what the fans feel sometimes when there's an underdog in a fight. Go on, the underdog. And I was just pleased with him. And he said to me a few months ago, I think, when we win, I'll FaceTime you from the dressing room. And I was laying in bed. It was a bit of an awkward one, Rob, because I was absolutely stark bollock naked. And he's just called me, and I'm like, I thought, I can't not take it. So I took it and just trying to make sure it's sort of up here, but he's still got a bit of hairy shoulders. And I know how that feels because I've been there. When it's all fresh and exciting and it's you against the world, I've been there. You know, when Froch beat Boutte, or when Barker beat Gill, or when Brook beat Porter, or, you know, that feeling is amazing. And to see, it's not just Sam, but to see anyone get to experience that kind of feeling when you're so close to a fighter and you're such a tight-knit team is a wonderful feeling. And that's why I was very happy for him, you know, because they haven't been bit. There's not many people, Rob, in boxing, because there's a lot of people in boxing that have been in boxing for years that haven't been bit by the bitterness bug, right? That sort of the devil, you know, just miserable all the time, you know. And Sam at the moment is so fresh that he ain't even thinking about that. You know, sometimes probably I have to fight it off a little bit, but I'm not there yet either. But you just got to be careful, that because it does do that to you, the business. And I watch some people's interviews, I won't lie, it's frank, and I just think, mate, you should just jack it in, because you don't need this in your life. I don't want this in my life forever. I do it because I love it. We're very successful at it, and I feel like I have so much more to do. But I promise you now, I will not be in boxing at that age. And Aram, I look at Aram and I just think, mate, just go and sit in the villa on the beach, you know, and just enjoy yourself. You don't need the aggravation in your life. No one needs aggravation in their life. And boxing gives you aggravation in your life. So it's really refreshing when I see people like Sam, you know, just like oblivious to it at the moment, to what's coming, you know, and he'll find it with Joe. You know, I don't think he has long on his contract with Frank. I don't know the situation. I'm sure there's some ups and downs there. What's he going to do? You know, he's going to have good nights, bad nights. And maybe in 5 or 10 years, Sam Jones will be on there doing an interview with you going, fuck it, Eddie Hearn, Frank Warren, right? You know, because that's what he can do to you. So I was just really pleased. I've known Joe a while, nearly signed Joe when he turned pro. You know, and Adam Morley and all those guys, they're a nice team. And I like good things happening to good people. So yeah, it made me smile.
Obviously, you don't promote Joe Joyce, but the first name that came out of his mouth after the fight is somebody that you do promote in Alexander Usyk. Now, obviously, the WBO title situation, we're still waiting to see what's going on there. Could it possibly happen? Could Usyk Joyce happen? I don't think Joyce was ranked by the WBO, but he's obviously picked up the WBO international belt now.
I don't know if that belt was on the line, was it in the end?
Did they get it sorted? I saw Paco's tweet, but I didn't see if they got it sorted.
They didn't announce it on the night, so I don't know if they got sorted. So it just, you know, as we've seen before, just because Dubois was 2 doesn't mean Joyce goes 2, but you would, you know, that would, common sense would certainly prevail in that instance. Now, if AJ has to vacate the belt, then certainly a vacant belt will be contested by the 2 highest ranked fighters. One is Alexander Usyk. If Joe Joyce went to 2, he would be the guy who would fight Usyk for the vacant title. I think, you know, if I'm Joe Joyce, and even if I'm BT, I'm getting Joe Joyce out in the first show of 2021. You know, he doesn't have yet maybe the star drawing explosiveness of Daniel Dubois that they built so much, because he hasn't been built yet. But he is a top class heavyweight. So they should be getting behind him, really. And I would expect him to fight in January, you know, and then I think a fight so at some point that WBO belt's going to become vacant, because even if Joshua beats Pulev and we get it approved for AJ to fight Fury for the WBO, we'd have to vacate after anyway. Do you know what I mean? So at some point, probably next summer, that WBO title is going to become vacant. And if Joe is ranked 2, he will get the shot at it. And I think, you know, it's a good fight. Obviously, they've boxed before. You know, you've got Usyk should outbox him, but Joe is huge, and Joe will walk him down, and he'll do what Joe Joyce does. Yeah.
What's going on with Joseph Parker Jr. Farr? Because that's another fight that's in the mix at WBO.
Yeah, so that was that's now going to be reset for February, because Farr had to have surgery on an injury. So that was a bit of a disappointment, because that was also the fight for the WBO Oriental, 2 top-ranked WBO guys that kind of felt that would bring out the number 2 spot. Listen, maybe Joe Parker against Joe Joyce. Another good fight. You know, Joe Joyce is always going to be in good fights because, as I said, you know, and I said in the build-up, to the naked eye, like my mates, again, my casual boxing fan mates, messaged me after the second or third round going, well, what is this? These 2 blokes. And I said, no, it's just our Joe. Watch what happens. Watch what happens. And Joe's a right handful. He just doesn't come out looking like AJ or, you know, Fury or, you know, even Usyk, but he does his own thing, and it's very effective, and he's very strong, very tough, and he has a great chin.
Right, moving on from Daniel Dubois versus Joe Joyce, another fight obviously captured the imagination. The return of one of boxing's biggest stars to the ring, Jake Paul against Nate Robinson on Saturday night in the Mike Tyson-Roy Jones Jr. undercard. Can Jake Paul fight? He looks like he might be able to fight a little bit.
I messaged him last night. I mean, he's lost his marbles a little bit, because I think I said something like, "Don't forget I made you in boxing," just joking. And he said, "Don't forget I told you I'm the next Floyd Mayweather." And I'm like, all right, Jake, calm yourself down, you know. But Jake's just doing his thing. I think it's great. I mean, I kind of feel that I'm getting a little bit of, not sure what the right word is, but just peace within myself that what I did a year ago, although it had been done, well, it hadn't been done previously, as these guys being professional fighters, was actually quite groundbreaking. And now people are looking at it going, no, this is actually, there's more people now saying this is good for boxing. I mean, when I did it, it was just an absolute disgrace and I was a scumbag. You know what I mean? But now all of a sudden, no, you know what, Jake Paul, and actually, fucking right. The guy is 2-0, right, as a pro fighter. However way you want to dress it up, the guy would beat a lot of pro fighters out there. Maybe a lot was the wrong word, but a number of pro fighters out there. Let him do his thing. Why are you so, you know, and I hate this thing, not just in boxing, but in like, oh, it's taking away opportunities from us, you know, the real fighters. No, mate, it's a free world. There's no barrier to entry. Just because this guy's built a massive fan base and now he can go into boxing, he can train like you train, might not have done it for all the years, but he can go out, he can fight with 10-ounce gloves on, and he can pass his medicals, he can get matched. Let him do his thing, right? And I promise you this is good for boxing. Now, the problem is where it goes, Rob. You know, whether people start looking at these normal fights, you know, I don't know the numbers in America, but I'm hearing anything from 600,000 buys to 1 million buys, right? Whatever way you want to look at it, that is crucifying Spence against Garcia, Tank against Santa Cruz, Charlos. I mean, these pay-per-views are doing 60,000, some of them, 100,000. Maybe a really good one these days is 200,000. So if you're going to get 600,000 or however much the number was tuning in to watch boxing. And by the way, when I watched the Mike Tyson fight, I only watched sort of snippets of rounds. As a fan, I tell you again, I didn't think it was too bad, right? I was thinking it was going to be a lot worse. And I was hoping someone didn't get hurt. No one got hurt, no problem, you know. And it was actually a little bit nostalgic to watch Mike Tyson ring walk to the ring. You know, the worry is where it goes, because don't forget, every broadcaster wants numbers, right? Every broadcaster wants subscriptions. Every broadcaster wants to drive pay-per-views. So if you're producing a fight, and this goes back to like the worry for boxing is that, you know, one of the biggest fights in America is Errol Spence against Terence Crawford. Well, that might do a third of the buys of Mike Tyson coming back with Jake Paul on the undercard. So if you're a broadcaster or if you're in the boxing business, you don't really care about the image and the future of the sport. You care about what event are you going to deliver to drive the numbers. When I say you don't care, I mean the broadcasters. We have an obligation for the future of the sport, but we also have an obligation to deliver for the guys paying the money. And when we're under pressure to deliver numbers, all of a sudden, you know, the biggest fight that I did on DAZN in terms of driving subscribers was Jake Paul against KSI. You know, followed narrowly by Joshua against Ruiz. Now, the Joshua against Ruiz subscribers will definitely have more longevity on the platform. But in terms of coming in and making some noise, we just got to hope that some of those people who watch that fight will also buy Spence against Garcia. And some will, by the way. Not many, but some will. But even if some are, you know, and when I watched the production and I watched, you know, the music acts and I watched Snoop Dogg's commentary, which I thought was absolutely hilarious, I had no problem with it. It's entertainment. But it's not, say it's not boxing. I mean, I don't know. You know, Jake Paul, he can fight. He can fight. And I have no problem with it. I really don't. I have no desire, to be honest with you, to jump back in and do another one. Would I do another one? 100%. But I'm not out there now thinking, wow, yeah, that went well. What other YouTube fights could I make? But I would definitely work with Logan Paul. I would definitely work with Jake Paul. I would definitely work with KSI. Well, you have to say, Jake Paul against KSI does big numbers globally. And by the way, they're going to want an absolute fortune. But, you know, it does come down to also, like I see so many comments from fighters saying, stop this shit, you know, this is terrible for boxing, this is not fair, and blah, blah, blah. Mate, they built their following. They built the right to go into anything they want to go into. So, and as long as they take it seriously, as long as the standard's decent enough, and as long as this whole new audience is coming to sport, I think we should embrace it. I really should.
To be honest, I'm going to weigh in with my 2 pence here purely because, you know, we cover boxing and you know, it's a question I get asked all the time. For example, our biggest show this year was not Wilder Fury 2. Our biggest show this year was Demetrius Andrade versus Luke Keeler.
Really?
Hmm.
Oh, because of Jake Paul.
Because Jake Paul and Gibb were on the undercard. But that's kind of an indicator. Wilder Fury 2 was this massive pay-per-view. And obviously, I'm a boxing fan first and foremost. I love boxing and would much rather cover that. But from our perspective, the numbers were driven by Jake Paul, Anderson Gibb.
But Rob, your owners, right, would say, fucking hell, we'll have more of them, right? Same thing with Boxing Social. Coogan says, I mean, and Anderson Gibb posted the other day to say, and it was like, I don't know if you saw it, it was like 3 different screenshots. One was AJ against Ruiz 2. One was Fury against Wilder 2. And one was Jake Paul against Anderson Gibb. And it was the YouTube fights, the full fights. AJ was 2.8 million. I think Fury was 2.9 million or 3 million. And Anderson Gibb was 21 million. You know, and it's like, you can't ignore it. So, listen, I hope that some Jake Paul fans or Anderson Gibb fans or KSI fans become Anthony Joshua fans. Because there's a big, you know, there's a huge audience there. It's just another world. It's a little bit like, on a really weird level, see No Context Hearn, right? If you go to people that post those memes and comment on them and, you know, Andy, No Context Geezer will repost them. If you click on them, most of them don't follow me. most of them actually don't know who I am or what I do. If somehow I can get them to follow me or understand what I do and just learn about boxing and just follow some of our fighters, this can only be good for the sport. Not no context hurt, but you know, that new audience. We can't just be dinosaurs, and we can't be so stagnant that we just say, no, this is our sport and we're going to grow old gracefully with it, because there'll be no future. The danger is that it becomes the norm. And that's something I'm not comfortable with. You know, I don't want to see these every week. I don't mind the odd one coming in. It's a big event, major event, you know, but we have to remember the beauty of the sport, the pureness of the sport, but we also can't be blind to try and grow the audience and embrace this new culture and how people are digesting content. And it comes back to, you know, when you talk about DAZN and streaming, and this is the future. So, yeah, I thought, again, going back, I mean, I just woke up in the morning and I was like, oh, shit, Tyson Jones. So I went to the phone, you know, it was a draw. So like, and then I watched a bit of it. I went, oh, he looks all right. And then I watched some other bloke rapping. I thought, oh, production looks good. Then I saw Jake Paul, thought, blimey. Then I started listening to the snippets of Snoop Dogg and I thought, you know what? Like, if I'm watching that show, that's a show. That's entertainment. That's giving you value for money. You think that all that stuff that happened on that night, I don't know how much it was in America. Was it $60?
$50, I think.
Yeah, $50, 40 quid. At least you've had an evening of entertainment. You know, if you just get a poor undercard and a borderline pay-per-view fight in America for $80 or $75, that's £60. Do you know what I mean? So I think that people who watch the Mike Tyson show were probably thinking, that was all right, yeah. I'm happy with the money. $50 is a lot of money.
All right, we'll move on now because I'm sure there's boxing fans who've probably turned this off, if not, have just been sick everywhere. But it's also it's worth pointing out, you know, the kind of the vogue thing to say is, you know, boxing is becoming a freak show. People seem to forget the long, extensive history of boxing where the freak show has always been around. I mean, Jack Dempsey came out of retirement after 13 years to box Cowboy Luttrell. We saw Muhammad Ali versus Antonio Inoki in an MMA fight. We saw a night where George Foreman fought 5 guys in one night. So, I mean, as a sport, we love a spectacle. I think it's probably it's good to debate this in a normal way without just immediately turning a blind eye to it. But we've done that now. So let's go and talk about the show this weekend. Billy Joe Saunders returns to the ring against Martin Murray. We spoke about Danny Jacobs earlier and the fact that his performance didn't set anything alight. Billy Joe Saunders needs a really big performance this weekend. Is that fair to say?
It's the same problem, you know. And when you look at Danny, you say, okay, well, Danny was on the top of everyone's list to fight for a title at 168. I'm not saying he's off that list. He's not. But the demand for that fight isn't as big. So I tweeted earlier in the week and I said, major statement required versus last roll of the dice. And when you get those two colliding, it can be quite dangerous because Billy Joe, anything but a great performance from Billy Joe Saunders on Friday is not good enough. You know, and I think I even want to heap the pressure on him this week and say, mate, you have to go in there and look sensational. You've got to, you know what, Rob? It's a bit difficult because it's hard for someone outside of the team or a promoter to go in there and say, you have to take chances. You know, you have to go in there and be exciting. Because if I was a fighter, I'd be training, I'd think, fuck off, mate. You know how dangerous it is in there. We'll do our own thing. Thank you very much. But I'm just telling you the truth. From the commercial side, from the demand side, people want to see aggressive performances. People want to see you go in there and try and knock your opponent out. So that's what I want to see from Billy Joe Saunders. On the other side, you've got a guy, Martin Murray, and you guys won't see this and the fans won't see this. He's basically locked himself away, right? He hasn't really been willing to do any media even with us. He's just kept himself, you know, and I posted a video yesterday about, obviously, the passing of the late, great Oliver Harrison. It's almost like channeled everything with Jamie and Nigel to this is it, right? You should have beaten Sergio Martinez. Stern, you know, many people thought you won that fight. The Abraham fight was close. You definitely should have been world champion once, maybe twice. But this is it. And if you look at Billy Joe Saunders' performances at 168, you know, when he won the title and then he won it out in Staples Center on the KSI card, coming back from really being behind in the fight, neither of them was sensational. So if I'm Martin Murray, and I'm particularly if I'm Jamie Moore and I'm Nigel, I'm saying he's done nothing in the last couple of years. It's behind closed doors. He's going to be flat as a pancake. Go out there and work him from the first bell. So, and when it's the last chance saloon, you get one or two things. You get a guy that puts his absolute heart and soul into the final roll of the dice, or you get a guy that starts like that and then after a while goes, well, it's my last one anyway. So that's not Martin Murray, the latter, right? You know what you're going to get from Martin Murray. Now, Billy should box rings round him. You know, Billy should look sensational. But this, again, going back to behind closed doors, and I think anything can happen in this fight. Don't get me wrong, Billy's a favourite. But if I'm Martin Murray, I fancy it. I really fancy it. And the pressure on Billy Joe, you know, I see people's, oh, easy fight for Saunders. Yeah, another easy fight for Saunders. The pressure's to look good, to put a statement in where Canelo Alvarez, if he beats Callum Smith or Gennady Golovkin or Demetrius Andrade, go, I want him. And the broadcasters go, yeah, you know, they phone me the next day and go, wow, Billy looked great. Let's make that fight. No one's calling me. So the pressure's on Billy, really on Friday, to put in a great performance.
Is it frustrating for you? Obviously, Billy's missed out on the Canelo fight with the fact that he said that he wouldn't be ready in time. He's now fighting before Canelo's fighting, ironically, and he's fighting somebody, Martin Murray, who he was supposed to fight a couple of years ago under Frank Warren.
No, so it's frustrating because we agreed the Canelo Alvarez fight for Cinco de Mayo. And Billy Joe was flown out to LA by Golden Boy, and we were announcing the press conference the next day. And then the pandemic hit, and it was just, well, actually, let's just wait a minute. 1 week later, everything's off. So that's the frustrating bit, because he had it. It was all agreed, that fight. When we talk about him saying he wouldn't fight him, Canelo was never fighting on December 19th. Canelo Alvarez was due to fight in September, all right? And when the offer come, it wasn't even an offer. Billy Joe just said, unless I get what I want, I'm not ready for that date. And I'm not going into that fight not ready. Then he agreed to fight Martin Murray. And then eventually Canelo went for December. Murray fight was already agreed. And that was the fight that Billy Joe was focused on. To be honest with you, Rob, one thing about Billy Joe is he ain't going to do anything he don't want to do. And it can be frustrating sometimes, right? Because he could have got, you know, he ended up getting the Canelo fight for very good money before the pandemic, but he probably could have got the Canelo fight for a bit less money. He said, no, that fight is the biggest fight in the division, and I want what's right in that fight. And that was it. You know, I don't agree with that necessarily, but I respect his principles. So now he's taking this fight, but unless he looks good in this fight, you can say goodbye to the bigger fights, because the broadcasters won't pay the money that he wants for those fights, right? So Billy Joe's going to always do what Billy Joe wants to do. We've got 3 days left. Every day is a blessing that Billy Joe gets through without causing some upset somewhere. But, you know, I don't know how well you know him. One thing I know about Billy Joe is he's a good bloke and he's got a good heart. He's just stupid sometimes and he doesn't think, right? But what he can do is fight like fuck. But we want to see it because we haven't seen it. You know, he flew into LA. There was a problem with his visa. He didn't get in there till the Monday. Everything was a bit of a mess, but we didn't see a great performance. When he won the world title, okay, didn't really see a great. I want to see the Lemieux performance because I sat there and watched that fight and I was mesmerized by what I saw from Billy Joe Saunders. So let's see the fighter that everybody keeps talking about as could well be the best. Everyone that says, I'm telling you now, I've watched all these, I watched his Billy Joe is the one, he's the one. Prove it. Prove it on Friday night. But Martin Murray's going to do everything he can to win this fight, and they fancy it.
Before we come on to the rest of the card, Eddie, what's the latest with Demetrius Andrade and Liam Williams? Obviously, Demetrius Andrade's fight is now off. When can we expect that mandatory to take place, if it takes place?
So we're talking now with MTK about making that fight. We are planning that fight for February in Providence. So I guess we'll carry on the negotiations, and then we probably won't get there, and then it'll be called for purse bid soon. And then we'll see who wins it, and if we win it, we'll go to Providence. Demetrius is in a similar boat to Billy, where he just wants the big fights. I'm not saying that, well, he doesn't want to fight Liam Williams, but I don't think he's overly motivated to fight Liam Williams. He wants to fight Golovkin. He wants to fight Charlo. He wants to fight Munguia, who is his actual mandatory. It baffles me that Charlo won't fight Andrade. Again, Andrade is a fighter that in the game, everyone says he's unbelievable, a bit like Billy Joe. But I haven't yet seen, because he hasn't been tested to the levels, why a Charlo or why a Munguia or why a Golovkin, although I believe Golovkin will fight Andrade, wouldn't want to unify or fight for the championship against Andrade. Because, Luke Keeler, he's levels above Luke Keeler, took his time. Sulecki had him over, but ended up winning on points. Avakov won on points, so he's very good. He's got a very awkward style, but I think these guys should be testing themselves to be great. Charlo, first thing he says, I want to unify like my brother. Go on then, it's there. Ain't even expensive. We'll help you out, because I want to see Demetrius in those fights. I want to see how good he can be. That's why it was so pleasing to get the Callum Smith-Canelo fight, because otherwise they're in fights they're not motivated for. Can Callum Smith be a great? Now we're going to find out. Can Billy Joe? Can Demetrius Andrade? Let's find out. It's very difficult.
Staying with Billy Joe Saunders and Demetrius Andrade, reading through the lines there, reading between the lines, could there be a possibility that we see Billy Joe versus Demetrius Andrade next year and not Demetrius Andrade versus Liam Williams?
Yes. But he would have to vacate his middleweight title, or he would take that fight and they'd say, if you win, you have to decide what you want to do with your title. But Liam Williams would get the shot at the middleweight title against whoever's, probably Jamie Munguia. I think that if Billy Joe doesn't get the winner of Canelo against Callum Smith or Golovkin, and obviously Canelo or Callum Smith could fight Golovkin in May, then I think Andrade against Saunders is probably the one that you would end up seeing.
Well, I might as well touch upon him now because we're talking about super middleweights. Zach Parker returns to the ring this weekend. He's somebody else who's been calling for these domestic fights, Billy Joe Saunders, Callum Smith, etc. Good opportunity for him to put himself in the shop window. Yeah,
I thought he boxed well against Rohan Murdoch in that fight. And actually, Zach Parker is effectively the mandatory for Billy Joe. So unless we pull a big fight out the bag, Billy Joe will have to fight Zach Parker as well at some stage. So good to get him back on Sky. He's got a decent fight. The guy did get stopped by Belanga, but he's a decent fighter, Nunes. And I think it's important again, I can't stress enough how important it is to look good and look exciting. Also on this card, coming in at 4 days' notice, is Lerone Richards, right? He's fighting Timo Lane. Timo Lane is a really tough guy who has fought top super middleweights and gone the distance. These fights are quite dangerous. Not always about losing, but about devaluing yourself if you don't go out there and look good, right? So Lerone is tough because the guy's durable, he's tough. And Lerone's thinking, well, it's just an 8-rounder. I'm just getting through the year and then I'll go into the big fights next year. You still got to look good. Zach Parker, if you want to fight Billy Joe, if that fight has any kind of value, you've got to go and look good, right? There's some, the fight of the night for me actually is James Tennyson against Josh O'Reilly, eliminator for the WBA lightweight title. There's a guy you don't have to tell to look good, James Tennyson, because he just fucking goes out there and destroys people. And that's his style. He's so exciting. Shannon Courtney's got a very, very tough fight to come back from the Rachel Ball defeat. She's always exciting. She always looks good. You've got Lewis Edmondson in a good fight as well. And you've got Dante Dixon. Both Billy Joe's charges on the card on Facebook, those guys. And then we're going to start with Lerone. And then we're going to go Zach Parker. Then we're going to go Shannon Courtney. Then we're going to go Tennyson. Then we're going to go Billy Joe Saunders. So it's another good night. I think we're in a good place. Katie Taylor ratings were incredible. Conor Benn ratings really surprised everyone. They were fantastic. You know, you had Dubois-Joyce rated well at the weekend. Billy Joe Saunders will always rate well. You know, you've got Yard as well. You've got AJ next week. I think we're really, everyone's doing really well. I think boxing's on a real high.
Yeah, certainly a very top-heavy end to the year. You can tell by the little bags under my eyes of all of these late shows. You mentioned Anthony Joshua there. Watched your interview with Coogan. Talked about Mr. Fury potentially being in attendance. Does he know about that?
I don't know. I think there were some talks about the Zone's global service having Fury there on the night. He's more than welcome. The focus for us is not getting Fury in there at the moment. It's getting live fans in at the moment. And we are very, very close to an announcement where it will be emotional is the right word, but it will be quite emotional to actually announce that we can bring fans back. And that's what we hope to achieve in the next sort of 48 hours. So 1,000 tickets, hopefully. And if Mr. Fury wants one, he's more than welcome, but he might be working anyway. So big night. You know, I'm already... It's great to have 1,000 people in, but it's still going to be quite strange because every AJ fight is 80,000, 90,000 or 20,000 at a sold-out arena at full capacity. So I'm very nervous about the fight because it's heavyweight boxing. Anything can happen. You know, you saw it with Dubois-Joyce, you saw it with Whyte. Anything can happen, but I do believe you're going to see the best heavyweight in the world put on a phenomenal display. And I think it's going to be brutal. I really do. I think he's going to make a statement, and hope I'm right because it's a tough fight.
No, we were both there on that fateful night at Madison Square Garden about 18 months ago. Feels like an absolute eternity ago, but 18 months ago. That only just heightened his concentration going into this fight, the fact that he had that massive upset 18 months ago.
I think so. You know, there was, you know, he's... I hate making excuses because he's never made one, and he hates even, you know, but there were, you know, he did have some issues in camp in that fight, medical issues, not, you know, no rubbish about sparring and all that stuff. And, you know, he probably wasn't 100% in that fight. And these things only really come out after the fact because everyone keeps everything to themselves. And, you know, what might seem a relatively minor thing at the time, when you actually look back in defeat, you go, well, actually, you know, and then you fix that and you come back and, you know, he was really 100% for the Ruiz rematch, done a great job. This is the kind of fight where I think he can go and just express himself a bit. You know, he has to be very careful because Pulev can punch. He's very sound technically. But I think the styles will make for an exciting fight. I think AJ can enjoy himself a little bit more, and we can see that sort of brutal AJ that we saw coming through. And I really think it's going to be a devastating, brutal performance. But I do also think there'll be times in the fight where we'll be holding on to our chairs and, you know, praying that he can come through and finally we can get this Fury fight on.
Have you had recent conversations with Mr. Arum regarding the Fury fight?
A few bits and pieces with their team. And really, for me, you know, my message to them was, don't have a warm-up fight in February or March. You had your chance for a warm-up fight. We want to go straight into it. So April, May, June, any of those dates, let's lock that in. There's no reason why over the next couple of weeks we can't start getting into a position where after that fight we can actually turn around and say, we're all agreed, here's the date we're working towards, you know, and then try and solve the problems of any governing body that might not want the undisputed championship, or Alexander Usyk, can we keep him happy, and etc. But ultimately this fight has to happen, but it can only happen if Anthony Joshua beats Kubrat Pulev on December 12th.
We had an indication from Bob Arum as to the kind of the update of the legal proceedings from Deontay Wilder, Shelley Finkel and co.
And I only saw a Wilder came out yesterday and said I'm boxing at the end of Jan, early Feb. So he can't be holding too much hope for the rematch if he says that he's in discussions at the moment about opponents and stuff like that. So I don't know, not my business, but hopefully nothing can get in the way of that fight, AJ against Fury. But first things first, as we've seen in the past, just do the business against Kubrat Pulev on December 12th.
I'm assuming none of those opponents include Dillian Whyte, who he was calling out a couple of weeks ago.
No, would love that fight, but obviously Dillian's focused on fighting Alexander Povetkin, which we will announce soon, and that's really the only focus. But certainly, if he can come through that, I think the Deontay Wilder fight with Dillian Whyte is a big, big fight.
Okay, just final, very, very quick couple. DAZN, very strong end to the year. Gennady Golovkin returns against Kamil Szeremeta. Again, a fight that's been seemingly dragging on for ages and ages and ages. Great to get Triple G back in the ring before the end of the year.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's his championship defence, 21st championship defence. Szeremeta, who is, sort of world level, but yet to prove or yet to face anyone elite. Got a good team, and we've got actually a big run for Polish boxing. You've got Mariusz Wach against Hughie Fury and Glowacki against Akoli on the AJ bill. Then you've got Szeremeta after that as well. So I think that Szeremeta comes from good stock. I think a lot depends on Gennady Golovkin. If Gennady Golovkin is still the same fighter, I think he goes in and looks sensational against Szeremeta. If he's not, and you've got Szeremeta can be young and cute and, box well, then it might take him a little bit longer to get hold of him. But I expect him to win. And of course, the day after that is Canelo against Callum Smith. So I will be making my way to America finally. But somehow I've got to be going backwards and forwards between press conferences and weigh-ins and fights. So again, just, across the schedule, everything we've done really from fight camp leading up to this massive December. And of course, Campbell against Garcia on January the 2nd as well. I think we're in great shape for next year. And, the plan for us is to keep expanding globally, which we talked about, and keep making those international matchups really and in-house fights that are easier to make. The start of the year for us is going to be really, really explosive. You've got Warrington against Kanzu, you've got Kelly against Avanesian, you've got Whyte against Povetkin, and that's really that. There'll probably be 3 separate shows in January and early Feb. So we're looking to really start off with a bang, and hopefully we can continue pushing for crowds to return.
Busy January is always what we want to hear. It's usually very, very quiet. So that's music to my ears, certainly. Final one is on Campbell Garcia. What's the latest with that with regards to a venue? I saw Oscar De La Hoya tweeted last week about some sort of fight. I think Oscar De La Hoya's Fight Island sounds brilliant, by the way.
Where was it? In
Tijuana, Cancun or something.
Yeah, Cancun. Listen, I'm up for that Fight Island. But I think, realistically, you're going to see that fight probably in Texas or in LA, I think. But listen, it is what it is. Campbell's ready. Obviously, he had COVID. It took him a week or 10 days to recover. But thankfully, to Golden Boy and DAZN, they rescheduled the date, January the 2nd, which is an interesting date. Never done a fight on that time before. I don't know how I'm going to get there, or if I can get there, or get there somehow. But good fight, and I believe a Luke Campbell victory.
Okay, Eddie, I've taken up enough of your time. Thanks very much for speaking to Boxing Social. Best of luck with the show this weekend. I'll catch up with you soon.
Cheers, mate.